I feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Hey, tremendous Thursday to each and every one of you. We thank you for taking a little time out of the end of your week to join us here on EWTN's Open Line. We talked the new evangelization on Thursday, and, we're flexible. We'll even talk the old evangelization if you want to. The number to be on the program, 1-800-585-9396. That's toll-free anywhere in North America. 1-800-585-9396. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985. And we'll put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can send us an email, openline@ewtn.com, or you can text your question. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question. Message and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams. Michael McCall produces the program. Your call screener, Mr. Matt Gubensky, and Jeff Burson handling all of our social media endeavors. Father Larry Richards usually at the helm on Thursdays, and I indicated yesterday he'd be out today and that we would have a mystery celebrity guest host, and we indeed do. The pastor of Blessed Sacrament Parish right here, historic, dare I say, Blessed Sacrament Parish here in Birmingham, Alabama. Father Jim Booth. Father Jim, welcome.
Well, thank you, Jack.
Welcome back.
I don't know about famous.
Oh, yeah. You, Father Booth, to me you have the quintessential pastor personality.
Uh-oh.
I find it impossible to believe that I could be terribly alarmed about anything when I was in your presence.
So at this point, all I can do is disappoint, is what you're saying.
You just have a calming way about you, and I'm sure that has served you well in this position.
At times,
and it probably served you well in the engineering field as well.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, there are fires to put out there. As I mentioned, you're the pastor of Blessed Sacrament Parish, which it really does have a storied history in the remnant history of Catholicism in Birmingham, Alabama. You could make the case that it's the most beautiful parish in the from a church building standpoint in the Birmingham area. It has some rivals, I think, but it's a pretty spectacular, traditional Romanesque kind of a building, and it's my kids went to the Catholic high school here in Birmingham in the early 2000s, and early to several years ago now, and many of their classmates, several of their classmates, have parents who grew up in that parish when it was a very different place. Talk a little bit about the landscape of an inner city parish in Birmingham, Alabama, here in 2017.
All right, it's an interesting situation. The parish was established in 1911, which in some parts of the country that's fairly new. In the South, that's not exactly the case. At least away from the coasts, you'll find that there isn't a great Catholic presence. So you'd have New Orleans, Charleston, Baltimore. That would be the nexus of Southern Catholicism, would be right on the coast for whatever reason. Inland, in Alabama, we were evangelized actually from the north, not from the south, by Benedictines who came in from Latrobe and from Indiana that came down. Mm-hmm. And Birmingham's actually a relatively new city. It didn't really exist at the time of the Civil War. There were plantations here and whatnot, but not a nexus for any sort of civilization. And that came about largely, the interesting of the history of the city is it's the only place that, at least recently, has been known that has all the ingredients locally to make steel. Nothing has to be imported. We have coal, we have We have all sorts of iron ore. We have all of that. So that brought in all sorts of people from Central Europe. So we had in the Birmingham area, we had like a Polish community. We had a German community. We had a large, strong Italian community. So it was more ethnic than the typical Southern Catholic experience is. So we had a large influx in Birmingham, the turn of the last century thereabouts, and we were part of that. So the parish started out as maybe a church that sat 50 to 75 people, and that started from 1911. It was outgrown already by 1920.
Just from the immigrants.
Just from immigration. And so they started raising money. They built the church. They began it in 1929 before the stock market crash. And the stock market crash, of course, had its own ramifications. So they were able to finish the structure but not go much further than that. They went deeply into debt for that. It wasn't until the mid-50s that the parish got out of enough debt, or was actually debt-free, to where they could begin to decorate the parish. And it was done in a very, very tasteful and very beautiful way that I'm not sure that we could really match today.
So, from an evangelistic standpoint, your particular parish in this inner city was populated largely by Catholics who came into the area, as opposed to maybe those that had been evangelized by the Benedictines.
Right. They were, for lack of a better word, imports. So, like the Irish, the Italians that had come to Birmingham, right.
And now a very different landscape really sits nestled in a neighborhood that would be probably largely either evangelical Protestant or unchurched.
Right. That would be...
So really, evangelization takes on a whole new meaning for Blessed Sacrament.
It does.
Now.
And it's a great challenge because when you're faced with, say, property values that are so low, you could buy a reasonable a house in reasonable condition for under $50,000 in the neighborhood. Some go as low as $15,000.
Wow.
A fixer-upper would. So that is, that with that level of poverty, that level of unemployment, that level of whatnot that is there, it's difficult to get people to focus on God when you have all these what seem to be more pressing concerns.
So actions probably to a large degree speak louder than words.
Yes.
In many of these situations. We'd love to hear from you, Father Jim Booth, the pastor of Blessed Sacrament Parish here in Birmingham, Alabama, sitting in for Father Larry Richards. If you're maybe you're from an inner city parish and have some struggles on the evangelistic front, perhaps Father Booth can give you a little insight from his experience at Blessed Sacrament. We'd love to hear from you. The number's 1-800-585-9396. It's toll-free anywhere in North America. 1-800-585-9396. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd love to hear from you. That number is 1-205-271-2985. We got a text from Elizabeth. She says, what do you recommend for someone who could use more spiritual discipline in their life?
Okay. Chances are we already have discipline in our lives. If you think about your morning routine, it is fairly well fixed. And a disruption to your morning routine is a disruption to the rest of your day, probably. So if you skip shaving, you skip brushing your teeth, you are in such a rush you don't put socks on, you're going to recognize the whole day that something is missing. So in terms of discipline in our spiritual life, we need to approach it like our morning routines. In fact, we can make it part of our morning routine. That I wouldn't think of having breakfast without having prayed first. Because we don't think about these terms. It's like, well, I got to make time for prayer. Yeah, you do. But you find time for shaving and grooming and all the things that we do. Same thing at the end of the day. We have an evening routine that we go through, and it's pretty well fixed. It's again, something we do with regard to how we get ready for bed and so on and so forth. Why can't we establish that same sort of thing? And the best way I know of how to do that is to incorporate right into the routines you have. So, for example, we're not living in monasteries generally, so that's pretty well dictated by what's called the horarium of the monastery. So that the rosary will be said at 3 o'clock, and everybody gathers for the rosary, and everyone knows it, and they get a sense of it. The bell rings, and they're on their way to the rosary. We don't have that in our homes, and we're not really called to have that level of regimentation in our homes. But we can certainly say, okay, I get up. The first thing I do is I do the morning offering. Or if I don't need my cup of coffee first, the first thing I do is my rosary. Or I pick up the Bible, because it's probably the best time of day. If you're an early riser in particular, the best time of day to actually get some quality time in with God, and actually be able to read the Bible without, the children saying "mommy, mommy, mommy," or the cat wanting to hop on you and all that. So if you've got that time where you can sit there and say, okay, I can do this now, then that would be a great time. Instead of just like, I've got to go check to see what's on my face page. I've got to go look at the internet. I got to see what's happening in the world. Well, the world will take care of itself. I rush in there and see what's on the TV or what's on the internet in terms of, look at what happened over in Afghanistan or whatnot. It will have happened anyhow, whether I looked at it or not. Okay, unless that's what we perhaps take for our prayer intentions that day. I might just say, okay, there was an earthquake over in Italy or wherever, and say, okay, that's something I need to pray for, and that's what I'm going to go back into my room and whatnot and pray for, instead of being caught up in, okay, what's the weather going to be today? The weather's going to be what the weather's going to be. But we get so caught up in like the computer sucking up all our time. We just need to be careful that we can actually at some point get the discipline to where we don't, take a smart phone into the shower with us. It's like, but it's going to get that way. Okay, it's going to be, that's probably the next thing is it's shower proof, so you can bring it in, and it's like, but we can certainly pray in the shower. We can pray while we're shaving, pray while we're dressing, and we can associate prayers with what we're doing. So there's a series of prayers I begin when I brush my teeth. That's my cue. It's time to make that prayer, because what is your mind doing while you're brushing your teeth? Not a heck of a lot. If, for example, you could pray for your mom and dad. Left shoe for mom, right shoe for dad. And that's a reminder. It's like, I can never remember to pray for my parents. Well, if you associate it with something you do every day, then it becomes a part of your life. And you turn it around. I'm praying. That's my reminder to put my shoes on, as opposed to the other way around.
Right. Father Jim Booth sitting in for Father Larry Richards. Wide open phone lines. Give us a call at 1-800-585-9396. Toll free anywhere in North America. 1-800-585-9396. EWTN's Open Line Thursday.
EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn.
If you're a Catholic and you're watching cable news or network news, you're getting your news on the internet, how often do you read Catholic-based stories? Not that often. Here at News Nightly, you can get the national news with a Catholic perspective, and it is so valuable for Catholics to be able to see the world through that perspective.
EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn. Weekdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Have you heard about Church Pop? Church Pop features new online Christian content that's fun and inspiring every day. Find it on Snapchat, Instagram, and on the web at churchpop.com.
Hi, I'm Doug Keck. I'm here with author Michaeline Friedenberg. We just finished doing an interview on her new book, Grief and Abortion, Creating a Safe Place to Heal. What's this book about, Michaeline?
Well, this book is specifically for those individuals who want to help somebody who's been impacted by abortion. And so it's going to give them an idea of what someone goes through, what the grieving process looks like, what the healing process looks like, and how they can be the most effective in helping them.
So is this for people then who want to get involved with that kind of post-abortive healing with others?
You know, it's actually more for those leaders who already are in contact with people who may be hurting, and so they're not going to become an expert in the area, but they want to be able to, at least in those initial contact, be able to effectively help them and then be able to make an appropriate referral.
Very good. Michaeline Friedenberg will look for the entire interview, Grief and Abortion, Creating a Safe Place to Heal, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Hello, this is Bishop Ronald Gaynor of the Diocese of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
This is Michael Warsaw, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of EWTN.
This is Father Mitch Pacwa. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Just a couple lines open now, 1-800-585-9396. We got another text from Laura, Father. She says, when I tell family about all we have in the Catholic Church, it makes them offended, and they say all churches are the same. How should I respond?
Well, clearly they aren't. We have people coming in and leaving churches. People will leave a denomination for various reasons, or they'll come into a denomination for various reasons. So someone might read John 6 and say, well, there's nothing there for me. And someone might read it very carefully at a later point in life and come to the realization, like, ooh, what does it mean that Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you? My church, my pastor has never said that before. What does that mean? And you start looking at it, and before you realize, you know it, you're looking at something different than what your denomination is teaching. And that denomination may say, well, we don't really emphasize that. We don't really take that literally. And you read it and you keep reading it and you cogitate on it. It's like, no, there's something here. Because Jesus makes it very clear that unless you do this, you have no life in you. It's like, wow. That's a pretty strong statement coming from Jesus. I need to figure out what this means. And if your church isn't addressing that, then it can't be equal. Jesus says at the end of the Gospel of Mark, unless you believe and are baptized, you will not be saved. And if your church doesn't really believe that baptism does anything, then you've got to start asking questions like, well, it just says right here, belief and baptism. So if my church doesn't say that, we can't say they're all the same. We absolutely can't. Because it just isn't a matter of showing up at church and going through the motions. It really does matter what we believe. It really does matter, because if we do not believe that God is love, it's easy to talk ourselves into thinking that, well, maybe the Trinity's wrong. And if the Trinity's wrong, then all of a sudden, what do I need for Jesus here? Why can't I go to God the Father? Or why do we even need to have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit? Well, we see churches out there that emphasize the Holy Spirit to the exception of the other persons of the Trinity. Or you'll see some that are so Jesus focused they lose sight of the Holy Spirit. There's got to be that balance in there. So we can't really just say they're all the same. The understandings there are enormous, especially when you get to the moral realm. For example, is it perfectly acceptable to divorce and remarry? And in the Christian landscape in America, if you're to look at the Protestant landscape, by and large the answer is yes, fine. But Jesus' own words, are saying, I'm sorry. What about abortion? One church says abortion is perfectly acceptable. Go forth. Yeah, no problem. And can the devout evangelical embrace the idea that, or the devout Catholic embrace the idea that there's nothing positively wrong with abortion? So, from a moral perspective, there is no equivalency from faith to faith to faith. We have to have an absolute understanding of what God has told us is right and wrong. And it's not up for us to make up things as we go along. And that's where we kind of are as a culture. We've gotten so far away from the moral standards of the Bible that all you have to do is look at our culture now. Well, I didn't hurt anybody. is or nobody caught me, and therefore what I did was okay. That's not going to stand before God. It's like, but Lord, no one was hurt. And that's the, sort of like the living the functional morality of a lot of people. And we can't just say that, what the church on 5th Street and the church on 7th Avenue are teaching is absolutely the same, because they'll come at morality in a very different way. So it's not just a matter of looking at the church in a social way or looking at it. It has to be the whole gamut of what does it mean to live a life as a faithful Christian. And we're not going to see equivalency from the various denominations.
To the phones we go. The number again, 1-800-585-9396. Our leadoff hitter today is Kay in Shelbyville, Kentucky, listening on YouTube, actually watching on YouTube. Hi, Kay. You're on with Father Booth.
Hi, Father. Thank you guys so much for your time and for taking my phone call.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Mine, too. I was wondering what kind of direction a layperson might go in for spiritual direction when the priest does not offer that in the parish.
Yeah, it's kind of tough. You may have. Do you have multiple parishes in your vicinity, or are you kind of a one-stop shop for possibilities for the priest?
Well, you're not going to like my answer, but in all honesty, we do not go to a parish in our own diocese.
Oh, no, that's
for reasons that are pastoral,
right,
and catechetical. So I'm not really comfortable going closer,
right?
Still, because we're kind of right on that line of diocese. But so outside of where we go and where we live, there's really not a close parish. We're pretty rural.
Okay, so your options are limited then.
Okay.
And that's yeah. Are there any religious orders anywhere near? Any monasteries or?
Well, St. Meinrad would be probably the closest. I don't know. Beyond that, I mean, I could reach out, and I guess that really at the core, the thought was, well, maybe I could, I don't want to stray from a priestly director because I don't want to get bad catechesis.
Right.
And although I think I know it, I am not a priest, so I'm not about to, presume anything beyond that. So, at any rate, all right. I mean, that kind of tells me what my options aren't,
right, and
my options are, and it just depends. The rest is up to me and the Lord. So, thank you so much.
Well, not necessarily, but are you sure that the more local priests are all easily written off so quickly?
Well,
they might surprise you.
I mean, in all honesty, no. In all honesty, no.
So
I would personally have to pray a lot, but I mean,
right.
I guess in all honesty, no.
So I would recommend at least finding out.
Yeah.
And you can always say you're not like, it's not like you're marrying, and making a lifelong commitment here. You can always just say this isn't working for me and move on. Right?
Sure. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. I have probably been obsessing and scrupulizing it to there's no lint left, but that's okay.
But just give it some prayer and
I think she should probably take great heart in the fact that she has come to the realization that that's an important thing to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that itself is a good thing. So just see what happens.
Okay.
God bless
Thank
you, Kay.
you.
And the nice thing now is that you'll have all of our listeners praying for you as well. That opens up a line for you at 1-800-585-9396. That's the number Maria used in Glen Gardner, New Jersey, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Maria, you're on with Father Jim Booth.
Hello. God bless you, Father.
Hello, Maria.
A question for you. When you're talking about evangelization on the whole and even in our inner cities, I was wondering if you read the book Noble Beauty, Transcendent Holiness, and Why the Modern Age Needs the Mass of the Ages. Because I'm reading it now, and they talk about the new evangelization and how much, that beauty of the Latin Mass and all the senses being touched, how it draws so many people in. And to me, it's like I love the Latin Mass, but I just think, on a whole, reading this book, it just seems like there's so much there that we overlook, and I just think every time I meet someone who has all of a sudden returned to the Latin Mass or comes to the Latin Mass, and I go to the Novus Ordo too.
Hang on there, Maria. We'll get Father's comments on that in just 1 second. The number once again, 1-800-585-9396. EWTN's open line Thursday. Father Jim Booth sitting in for Father Larry Richards.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
There's also a warning where he says, whoever's ashamed of me and my teachings in this ungodly age, I will be ashamed of him before my Heavenly Father in heaven. So let's all remember, we're going to appear before the judgment seat one day. The Lord will ask us, did you hear my prophecy?
Depart from me, you evildoers.
Yeah, we want to hear him say, well done, good and faithful servant.
Indeed.
Morning Glory, Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings, 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Living the Beatitudes with Father Bjorn.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. While purity is an important virtue, a lot of times we can confuse this beatitude for a discussion about sexual morality. To be pure in heart is to be completely focused on and in love with God. God has given us an invitation deep within us to share in His own divine life. But it's important that we choose to focus on Him and respond to that invitation. In a homily on the Mount of Beatitudes in 2000, St. John Paul the Great says that we are called to have an urgent response to choose between life and death. In one of the earliest known Christian documents on morality, the Didache, it says there are two ways, one of life and one of death, and between the two ways is a great difference. God has called us to be focused on Him and His love. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Listeners to Catholic radio, I think, benefit most, at least initially, from what I call remedial catechesis. What Catholic radio does is it becomes an echo chamber for the teaching authority of the Catholic Church. And what we're doing is teaching many things which have been neglected over the last 40, 50 years. If you listen to Catholic radio, you know what the Catholic Church teaches.
Al Cresta thinks Catholic radio is important. So should you. EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
1-800-585-9396. Couple lines open for you. That's toll free anywhere in North America. We're talking to Maria in New Jersey, and Father, she's seen tremendous fruit from the return to a large degree of the Latin Mass. Said she has nothing against the Novus Ordo Mass, but she's seen tremendous evangelistic fruits that have come from people that have been exposed to the Latin Mass. And do you know anything about the Latin Mass?
A little bit. A little bit.
Father Booth has the local Latin Mass community meets at in his parish. So Maria, you called on the right day.
So the answer to your question is it's not a matter of like some people have a very simplistic view of, well, if we just brought back the Latin Mass everywhere, everything would return back to 1955. spiritually and so on and so forth. That's not really the case. We're different people than we were in 1955, and part of the difference is our attention span's a lot shorter. We are interested in things that are enticing to our senses, which the Latin Mass can certainly be, if you're open to it. The other aspects with regard to things is we've gotten very narcissistic, and that shows up in the priesthood. It also shows up in the laity, and if you can hear it in a lot of the music, you'll hear since Vatican II, "Gather us in," for example. Well, you're singing it inside the church already. We're already gathered, which doesn't make sense. But there's a lot of me focus or us focus in the modern music, and it's appealing to many. And it's really should be more about God than it really has been in many respects. So, how do we start to re-evangelize with regard to the Mass situation we have? We have the English or we have the Latin Mass. Both can be done reverently. Both can be done in a way that can reach out. My main competition, if I want to look at it in terms of priest, in town is our cathedral, and they have a very reverent Novus Ordo English Mass, however you want to look at it, and it draws people profoundly. The music is top notch. The preaching is top notch. So it isn't simply just a matter of well, we just go from English to Latin or go to New Rite versus Old Rite. It can be done, and that is the key. It is the Church's faith. It can be expressed in either form of the Mass. I do both, English and Latin every weekend, but I do not have the draw that the cathedral has, because of their choir, because of their music director, because of the preaching of the rector of the cathedral, and so on and so forth, and of course the historicity of the cathedral. It is the cathedral after all. There's a certain attraction to that as well, but it isn't just a matter of what form of Mass we pick. It really needs to be focused on God. It needs to be reverent. We need to know that why we're there, and I think that's lost on way too many people today. It's about us too much, and that can that it's not a magical thing going, well, if we go back to the old Mass, that'll fix that. It has to start in our hearts.
Does that help, Maria?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for the call. We really appreciate it. That opens up a line for you at 1-800-585-9396. Next up is Francis in Ann Arbor, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Francis, thanks for holding. You're on with Father Booth.
Well, thank you so much for taking my call. I have a question about what Father said earlier regarding the idea that we must be baptized in order to be saved. And I'm sorry, I don't know what passage he was quoting. Unfortunately, I guess I'm like a lot of Catholics, where the Protestants seem to have the advantage because they study their Bibles. But I'm wondering how he reconciles that with what Vatican II stated about salvation, how other people of other faiths are not denied salvation. I have heard that they can be saved, but whether they know it or not, they're saved through the Catholic faith. So could you reconcile that for me and explain, you have to be baptized because many people in other faiths are not baptized, but the Church is saying that they are not necessarily denied salvation. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that question. It's a good question, and it's something that the Church has wrestled with since the very beginning. You may have heard of something called limbo, and that would be for especially like the unborn child who hasn't committed any, or not the unborn, it could be the unborn, or born child that hasn't committed any sins in and of themselves but hasn't been baptized. So they don't have, for example, personal sin on them, but they would still have original sin. And the concept, which the Church has never affirmed or explicitly denied is that they would go to a place called limbo that is not hell, but it isn't heaven. It'd be a natural form of paradise, for example, as opposed to a supernatural form of paradise for those who are, for lack of a better word, saved. Now, the passage I referred to is Mark 16:16. That Jesus is very clear that we must have faith and we must have baptism. It's not an either-or thing. Well, if I have faith, I don't need baptism, or if I have baptism, I don't necessarily need faith if I have a capacity for faith. But when it comes to salvation for somebody who is not baptized, it's up to God to make the ultimate decision on that. I can't tell you the exact criteria that God has in mind for that circumstance, but it boils down to, well, I know that the church says we need to be baptized, but I really don't think it's my place to say that my children need to be baptized or I need to be baptized. And we've got an indifference factor in there, and it's really not the case. It shouldn't be that case at all. We need to be very, very focused on the importance of baptism. And I think there is a spiritual indifferentism that has come in that kind of just says, well, it's okay, they're good people. Well, God can save somebody outside of the Catholic Church, outside of the Christian faith, but the way he has presented to us is through faith, baptism, and the other sacraments. That is the sure and certain method, sure and certain path to salvation, to die in a state of grace. And that's not possible outside of baptism and the other sacraments, depending on our life circumstances. So is it impossible for, say, a Buddhist to enter into heaven? No, that's not what the church teaches. They're not automatically damned. But we have to say that the normal means for salvation that God has given us is through baptism, is through faith, is through living the Christian life, living a life of morality, a life of faith, hope, and love. That is the sure and certain path. God hasn't constrained himself, however, to the sacraments. He can, if he so chooses, to look at the circumstances of somebody's life. Say, for example, they grew up in Tibet without the internet, without any books, without any reference to anything Christian. So they're not Christian. They've not actively rejected the Christian faith. Then there is a certain ignorance there that God more than likely will not hold against them.
But the normal means are the normal means for a reason.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Francis. We appreciate the phone call. The number's 1-800-585-9396 with your questions for Father Jim Booth on the new Evangelization. Sitting in today for Father Larry Richards. Next up is Eric in Slidell, Louisiana, listening on The Almighty's 690. Eric, you're on with Father Booth.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hi, Eric. How you doing?
I'm great. I was just calling. I had a question that a few people have asked me because I have been studying in the Catholic faith, have some Catholic friends, and some of the questions. One of the questions was why the word Catholic isn't mentioned in any of the Bible verses. Okay,
that's fairly straightforward. There are a lot of words that aren't in the Bible. For example, Methodist or Baptist, so on and so forth. That's a very simplistic thing. Well, surely it'd be in the Bible if that were the case. What Catholic means is universal. It means it is the one universal church. Say not the church of just Ephesus or the church of Greece or the church of Lebanon or the church of England or whatever. The idea is that the church is Catholic. There is one holy Catholic and apostolic church, as we recite every Sunday in the Nicene Creed. So the fact that Catholic is not in the Bible is neither here nor there. For example, we don't hear the word abortion in the Bible. We don't hear the word Trinity in the Bible. We don't hear all sorts of things that the Bible isn't like a lexicon for all things with regard to the faith. It is God's word to God's people, but it isn't necessarily laying forth what the church ought to be called.
Thanks so much, Eric. We appreciate that phone call. 1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. It's toll-free anywhere in North America. 1-800-585-9396. You know, Eric was listening on 690 out of New Orleans, Louisiana. A lot of great radio stations, approaching 400 of them around the country that carry EWTN programming, but there are still some pockets out there that don't have a station carrying EWTN in their area. And I want to tell you, if you're in that situation, maybe you're listening on the internet or you're listening on Sirius XM channel 130, and you would love to just be able to hop into your car and fire up a radio station with EWTN programming, give me a call, Jack Williams, at 205-795-5756, or send me an email, jwilliams@ewtn.com, and we can talk further about how you might play a role in making that happen in your area. We've got a Facebook viewer, Gomez. Hi, Gomez. He says, have you heard of parish cells? Can you do some explaining about them? My church is talking about starting some up, but I'm not sure if it's for me.
Parish cells. That's a new one.
My guess would be it's probably kind of a small group, sort of a setup like Father Ricardo has made popular in the Archdiocese of Detroit.
Yeah, it may or may not be for you. Some people engage others in a way that would be beneficial. You know, the talk back and forth, and you know, what do you think about it? What do you think? It's not that we have necessarily come to anything infallible by discussing something, but we can come to a deeper understanding of something. Well, how do you understand this? Oh, I understand this. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. Please explain that. And that might work for some people. It might not be you. You may not be that social. That's one of the things that it kind of figures into that. If you're kind of a wallflower, or you prefer to look at things on a private level, then being in a group is not maybe the best approach for you. So you'd have to kind of gauge that. Is it something that you would get some benefit out of based on your personality, based on how you want to approach it?
Thanks so much. We appreciate you watching today on YouTube, Gomez. 1-800-585-9396 is our toll-free number. Tanya is in the great state of New Mexico, listening on Sirius XM channel 130. Tanya, thanks for calling. You're on with Father Booth.
Hello, Father. Thanks for taking my call.
Hey, Tanya.
I was out hiking with a friend, and she said that she just heard that the Pope listed or sent out a letter that said other religions, other people are saved too. And I was listening to what you mentioned to the lady that was on just a little bit about baptism. And then I was talking to her, and based on what I remember hearing from a Catholic apologist on EWTN, that we don't know what's going to happen to other religions, whether they're baptized or not, but there's nothing that precludes them that once they die, that they have the choice to be served by Jesus at that point and accept Jesus at that time. What do you think about that? And did you indeed read something that the Pope issued? I didn't read anything, and I was wondering what you had to say about it. And I'll go ahead and get off. I'd just like to hear what you had to say on that.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. I'm not aware of anything where the Pope has made a definitive statement along those lines. But be that as it may, the Church does not teach that somebody outside the Church is by that very fact, automatically damned. How God is going to judge them is up to Him ultimately. So we can probably count on a moral component to how God is going to look at somebody. Have they followed their conscience, for example? A well-formed conscience is how we'll all be judged in terms of our moral culpability. So if somebody violates their conscience all the time, that's probably not a good thing with regard to their salvation. Now, how Jesus will perhaps save somebody like that, again, has not been revealed to us. It boils down to speculation. The sure and certain way of being saved is to be baptized, to have faith, and live the moral life, the life of the sacraments. That is why evangelization is so important. We cannot put it aside. We can't say, well, we'll let you go through life ignorant of Christ. We're not talking about creating a theocracy here by any stretch of the imagination, but we have a duty to evangelize. We see it at the end of Matthew's gospel. Go forth and teach all nations. Not just the people we like, not just our families, or the people we want to be in heaven and not the people we don't want to be in heaven. No, teach all nations, baptizing them. So that baptism factor it's called the Great Commission. It really can't be set aside. It's the last words Jesus says to his apostles. Go forth and baptize, teaching all nations. There's no saying, well, Jesus clearly didn't think it was important. No, it's the last thing he left them with. And it's important to recognize we have a duty to evangelize and, if possible, baptize and bring people to Jesus. We can't just be indifferent about it and have this idea that, well, it's okay, everyone's going to heaven. Jesus never says that.
And as we've often said, the Lord can save whomever he chooses by whatever means he chooses.
Absolutely.
But he clearly has set up an ordinary means by which these things are handled, and every degree to which we deviate from that, we increase our risk of not getting there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks so much. We appreciate that phone call. We've got an email here from Dave. He says, this is actually a good question. I kind of like this. Let's say I pray a prayer, the rosary, for instance, for the intentions of the holy souls in purgatory, the end of abortion, for priests and the sick, or I pray a rosary for the intention of the conversion of my brother. Is the single intention given more power or grace than the multiple intentions?
Well. Well, you could add
Dave's
all of them.
thinking some deep thoughts here.
Yes. You could add all of those intentions to your rosary. One of the things one of my sacramental teachers in seminary made a point of, most masses will have an intention for the living or for the deceased. And the idea that, well, only that mass is going to benefit only that individual is no. That's the priest's particular intention for that particular mass. But you can add your own intentions. Every Catholic should come to Mass with their own intentions. And it could be a laundry list of intentions, or it could just be one. But the fact we only bring one when we could be bringing 5, bring all 5. Because you're not going to get what you don't ask for. So we should be asking for the end of abortion. We should be asking for the conversion of our families. We should be asking for, and it really depends on what's on our heart, because of course we can drive ourselves crazy by, well, I need to bring all the intentions I possibly can. Well, whatever is that you bring. But does say, well, I've got a choice of praying for my brother's salvation or for the end of abortion. Which should I pray for? The answer is both.
Yes.
So the merits that can come forth from a single Mass are, just by virtue of what is actually happening in the Mass, is infinite. So it isn't just directed to the explicit offering of that particular Mass, as the bulletin might say, it's for so-and-so's, the prose of so-and-so and soul, and that's all it can be for. No, it could be for, you can bring your own intentions to that Mass, not just what the priest is offering explicitly for that Mass. Same thing applies for your rosary. Your rosary could be for any number of intentions, and the fact that you bring 5 intentions doesn't mean that 20% of the grace goes to one and 20% of the grace goes to the other. God doesn't work that way. It's sort of like love when you think about it. If you have 9 children or 4 children, doesn't mean that the children the family that has 9 children loves their children less because there's more of them. Because since God is love, that means that there is an infinite source of love. So love isn't one of these things where we parcel out so much for I'm going to give 20% of my love to my daughter and 25% to my son and 17% to my wife for this reason, whatever. It can't be that way. Love is infinite, and it can be not doled out like a dropper, but it flows forth in an infinite way.
One of the great talents we have as human beings is the ability to get legalistic about
Absolutely.
just about anything. It's funny. I had my wife passed away a little over a year ago, and we had a certain small amount of time when it was fairly apparent to us the direction this was heading. So we got to have some conversations along these lines, and it was obvious to us that when this transpired, monetary contributions toward masses were going to be coming our way. And we discussed how to do with that, and she was very adamant about having those masses said for the living and not for her. Now, they can be efficacious, certainly, for someone who might be in purgatory, but from an eternal standpoint, she took the perspective that, my work is done, and that these would be more efficacious for someone whose personal judgment had not yet taken place, most importantly, her children.
Right.
And what are your feelings in that sort of a situation? It's kind of along the same lines as Dave's question.
Right. Well, if you've got the choice, and if you're honoring her request, then by all means do that. But I'm not so generous. I think I want when I die, I'm going to need those masses probably for hopefully my journey quickened through purgatory. But there's no saying that it's an either or case. The masses can be offered for your wife and for those she was worried about in terms of their salvation.
Yeah.
There's no. We're putting limits on God, and God can certainly honor both requests without any diminishing either one.
Yeah, and I'm sure I find myself oftentimes, if I will have resolved to have done a certain amount of praying in a certain form, and have gotten busy, and find myself coming to the end of a day, I'll often start speculating as to, well, do I need to get these in before midnight? If I did it at 12:30 or 1 o'clock, does it still count for the previous day? And these can be, not in all situations, it could really, many times it could just be a reflection of our good intentions, but it is something that the enemy could use against us.
Absolutely. We can get overly scrupulous about things. And in all honesty, the church has kind of fostered a sense of being too caught up on things like that. I have a morals manual from the 1920s, and someone asked the question, well, when is midnight for the Eucharistic fast? And whenever you ask a question of Rome, you'll get an answer, and it's like if you can't stand the answer, don't ask the question. So the answer came back, well, it depends on where you are in your time zone. So if you're in Boston, midnight starts before earlier for you than it would, say, for somebody in Atlanta, even though you're in the same time zone.
Because you're further east.
Further east. So, okay, now what do we do with that? It's like all of a sudden I'm worried about it, and it changes from month to month because of just the way the Earth rotates and whatnot. And now you're tracking minutes, and it's like, please, this is a little too much. God doesn't have a stopwatch waiting. Oh, I'm sorry. It's now 12:01.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So these things are things that trouble us, but certainly don't
right.
add a year to or add a second to the life of to the time of our life.
Absolutely.
Or anything like that. Well, Father Booth, we appreciate you being so gracious with your time and joining us here on EWTN's Open Line Thursday. Would you be so kind as to leave us with a blessing?
Lord, we ask you to bless all who are listening, all of our loved ones. We ask you to bless our families, and let us always be in his love, in Jesus' love. We ask this in his name, and in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. On behalf of our host, Father Jim Booth, our producer, Michael McCall, call screener, Matt Kubensky, and our social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson, I'm Jack Williams. Back at it. I won't be back at it tomorrow. Mr. McCall will be back at it tomorrow, but Colin Donovan and a gaggle of theologians will be entering the studio to talk about the Reformation, but maybe in a way that's a little different than what you've heard. The church is always reforming. You can hear about that tomorrow. Until then, God bless.